And I'd love to hear from each of you on what some of the more interesting revenue experiments are that you're seeing take shape across media.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Seth. So Nucleus is a brand new company. We started about 16 months ago, and we were founded by Gannett. Am I on? I'm checking to make sure. No. You are. What I just said was brilliant, if you missed it. Nucleus is a brand new company. We started about 16 months ago. We were founded by Gannett, Tronk, Hearst, and McClatchy. And together, we are changing the way news gets bought in the digital landscape for advertisers. My entire life has been in the intersection between news and marketing and advertising, and so most of my life was as vice president of advertising of the New York Times, running the Sunday New York Times Magazine, T, and other things, including their mobile and tablet. And then I left the news industry for a couple of years to run revenue at a site called Mashable. And then I decided it was time to return and bring everything I learned from both the news industry and the digital industry to bring it together to breathe life into the thing I care about most, which is what I call mission-based media, meaning objectively intended media and journalism. And so I'm deeply honored to run Nucleus. What we're doing right now is changing the way advertising gets bought for the news industry, and it's why I was so excited to hear what Ken was saying, because I couldn't agree more. The regionality of news properties is what has been killing news properties from the business side for a long time. When you see national properties up there getting bought and raising revenue on a regular basis, that's exciting. Because advertisers didn't get tired of journalism, they got tired of scotch taping a buy together. So if you have been told in your industry, in your organization, that advertisers, by the way, I'm on day 9 of a 10-day road run, and every other moment of my 10 days has been nothing but with marketers and advertisers and agencies across the country. Not one of them has said, I don't believe in journalism. Not one of them has said, I get a bad return on my investment from journalism. Every single one said, it's a real pain to make buys across the country when you have different kinds of data, different kinds of technology, different audience sets. So what Nucleus is doing is not marketing ourselves as an alliance of news organizations. We're changing the dialogue. And we are marketing ourselves as a national audience buy, and the only one that can access that audience in their most trusted hometown news brand. That's very different. And it's how we need to reposition our business model from an advertising point of view. I don't think advertising is the only model, but I do think it will continue to be an important one if we can pivot in how we communicate our message.
I'm Mark Mawson. I'm with the Missouri Press Association. 236 daily newspapers in the state of Missouri belong to this organization, and we represent their interests. Prior to this, I was with the Kansas City Star. We did a lot of different digitally progressive things while I was there, and we're trying to bring that to our newspapers. Believe it or not, there are 40 newspapers of the 236 in the state that do not have a website. We are trying to bring digital advertising opportunities to those smaller weekly newspapers and smaller daily so they understand the importance of it. We've been working pretty closely with RJI, quite frankly, Walt Potter and the Potter and Associates, to provide training for them on the digital opportunities that present themselves. Opportunities like having a symposium here where they pay for the hotel rooms of these smaller newspaper editors and publishers to come and learn more about it. And also, we're going to have a program coming up here in January during winter break in which we've asked newspapers to raise their hand if they want to become more socially savvy on what they do. And we're going to embed students for a week in those smaller newspapers so they learn more about it, thanks to Walt Potter again and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. So my job is quite a bit different, quite frankly, than what a lot of yours are. We're just trying to get a lot of these smaller newsrooms, a lot of these weekly newspapers with 800, 1,200 circulation, 3 people on the whole staff. It's hard for them to keep up with everything because they have to deliver the paper on Wednesday and put it out to the post office and get it in the racks. But they have to keep up with the things that are happening digitally all across the country. So that's what I'm trying to do here at Missouri Press.
So I'm Kate Butler from the Associated Press, and the Associated Press, many of you know, is a news cooperative. We're a not-for-profit, and our mission is to serve the news community, news users and providers. So as I look out across the industry, I think that the thing I'm most excited about are these new subscription and pay models, the scroll, the later pay. Because, of course, if we could just make it really easy for people to spend as much on news as they do at Starbucks every day, I think we will have solved our economic problems, right? And I think a lot of this is going to be driven by the audio and Internet of Things, when you talk to Alexa, she's not going to say, hey, Katie, can I have your credit card? And are you willing to sign up for a year or 2 years, right? We're going to get to very frictionless, easy ways of paying, and I think that's going to be key. So I'm really excited about what we're going to hear later in the panels on that. As I look within the AP, one of the huge transformations that we've made in recent years is to go from a subscription-based annual subscription rate for a whole fire hose of content, as we call it. And when we talk about a fire hose of content, at AP we produce 2,000 stories a day, 9 million images a year, 70,000 videos a year. I mean, that's just a huge amount of content. So we've really been working in recent years to give our members and customers options for much smaller slices of content, verticals, and new ways of paying. So instead of just that big subscription every year, to get to a la carte payment and royalties and revenue sharing and metered subscriptions and meters with caps. I mean, sometimes we just have to sit down and we think about all the ways that we're letting people pay us and seeing what works. And that we've had a lot of really good response to that. I was delighted. A week ago, I was at a meeting, and one of our account people said that they'd gotten a call from one of our members saying, hey, I think something's wrong. We haven't gotten a bill from y'all for a little while now, so we want to get right with you. Well, it turned out that, in fact, one of the new models that we've been using, which we call digital news experiences, they're packages of sports content, widgets that publishers put on their different digital platforms. They get great content, we run the ads. The ad share for this member had more than taken over their subscription rate. And I'm looking at Sue Cross because I distinctly remember a conversation, what was it, like 3-4 years ago, where this was where we were trying to get to. If we could just help the newspaper industry, as Ken said, 2008, really, really difficult times under a lot of financial pressure. If we could just make it easier for them and then get to a point where we could work it so they didn't even have to pay us. And that's not a huge part of our membership, but it's working. And it took a while, and it's working. And so it's great to see these new models working, and we'll continue to do that.
And Jeff.
Hey, everyone. I'm Jeff Sonderman. I'm the Deputy Director of the American Press Institute. And our opinion, which I think you heard a lot from Ken as we kicked this off, is that the future and really the present of modern news organizations today is all about being audience first, which is different than digital first or mobile first or definitely not print first. It's about understanding your audience and all of their behaviors and needs, including what they'll pay for. So what we do, we're a nonprofit. We're in the DC area, and we work with publishers all across America, including some of the great examples Ken talked about this morning in Minneapolis and Dallas. And we help them become audience first. We work with them on understanding their audiences through new analytics services that we provide them, through doing research about how people get news and how they consume it. We work with them on developing these kind of reader revenue and subscription models and funnel management to go from 2% paying to 5% paying to hopefully someday 10 or 20% of their visitors paying. And a third thing that cuts across all of this that maybe we'll talk about a little bit later is organizational change and transformation. Particularly if you are a newspaper company, a TV company, and you come from a different background. These are big changes to put in place to become audience first, to become a place that gets revenue in different ways and conducts a different kind of content publishing. And it's not as easy as just saying, okay, let's do it. There's a lot of stuff that goes into managing the people and the processes and the change and making that stick and making that succeed. And that's another area that we think is extremely important to focus on.
Outstanding stuff, group. Thank you very much. Jeff, I'd love to continue this, some of this with you, and then we'll sort of go down the line with other areas. But please, I've asked all of the panelists chime in as appropriate, but we're not the panel that passed the mic and everybody's got to weigh in for their take. Time is of the essence, right? So Jeff, paywalls and subscriptions, I'd love to drill down for just a couple of minutes on what the API is learning in terms of who subscribes to news sources and why. I should also add a footnote here that we we're thinking about showcasing some visuals. Jeff's got some wonderful data, and Kate's got some examples. We don't have the display available option, but we can make that available to Jim and Tricia and put those in a folder somewhere for everyone to access. But Jeff, do you
Yeah.
just want to walk us through what you guys are
I'll
seeing?
just gesture a lot with my hands,
Perfect.
if that's okay. I'll draw pictures. So this is going to follow really well, actually, on a lot of what Ken talked about this morning regarding reader revenue and subscriptions. This is a big area of our work at API, and particularly in the last 12 to 18 months, as it's become a growing revenue stream, which is really promising. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of the groundwork that's already been laid, but there's 4 things that I think you might not know that we've seen in research and from working with publishers on this stuff. And so for those of you who are students, you know that this is the part where you write things down. So 4 things. One is people do pay for news. 53% of Americans in the research we've done are paying directly for some form of a news subscription. We'd like to see that number higher, but that number is growing, and that's more people than not. So we think that's promising. A second thing is that young people do pay for news. People your age, people coming out of college, essentially 18 to 34 is what we're calling young. It's not quite as many. It's about 37% off the top of my head. But that's not nobody, and that's a pretty healthy number for people early in life and could grow. What's really important to know, though, about these younger people is that they make these decisions differently. And hopefully the many younger people in the room, this sort of resonates with you. One thing is that their discovery of these brands and the relationship that eventually leads to subscription begins through social media, through engagement. It begins through discovery of these brands and builds over time by liking them on Twitter and by seeing interesting things on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat. And that's where a big part of the ROI of those platforms comes in. And then the other thing about young people is that they really want to buy into your mission as a news organization. They're not making a transactional decision. They want to feel like you guys are great, you're making my community better, you're defending us against people in power, and that's why I'm paying you. Okay, so number 3, this is really interesting. There's 3 different kinds of people as they think about paying for news. We've done human-centered design research. I don't know if people here know this lingo, but it's essentially go out and talk to a lot of people and interview them in a kind of structured way to figure out how people think about the world and make their decisions. And when you do that about news subscriptions, you see one group of people who are really wary of paying for anything. They don't like commitment. They're probably never getting married to anyone, and they're definitely never buying a subscription. They just are really scared to get out a credit card and give it to you. And they might read you a lot. It's not that they don't like you, but they're just not into you enough that they're going to pay you for stuff. So that's a difficult group. But the second group are what we call the sort of thrifty transactors. These are people who, they will pay for things, but they want to know they're getting a deal. They want to know the price is good, they're getting a discount, and they're really constantly evaluating, am I using this enough that it's worth it? I might cancel it in a few months if I don't feel like I'm using it. You can get them, but you really got to work at them, and you got to communicate about value and price. The third group is a group we love. The third group we call the civically committed, and these are people who want to throw money at you. These are the people who, they didn't go to journalism school, but they really care about journalism. They think it's important to support you. They think they're investing in the mission and in the ongoing sustainability of the institution. They will pay you more money than they feel like they should. They will keep paying for the subscription even as time goes by and they feel like they're not using it as much because they want to keep giving you the money. So 3 different groups, they buy it for different reasons, they have different value propositions, and it's changing the way that we need to think about who we market to. It's not one big group of the public who all just buy things the same way. Okay, so the fourth thing, which I was really excited to say to people here at a journalism school setting, is that as we become this majority subscriber-driven business that Ken talked about this morning, it changes the journalism. It's not just about where the money comes from and you guys just go tell the same stories that you always told, right? When you're in a subscriber-driven business that's audience first, it means that instead of looking at page views, you're looking at loyalty of individual people. You're not just chasing scale and just trying to get as many unique visitors as you can. It means that you're not just telling good stories that you think will win awards, right, and sort of satisfy your journalistic instincts. You need to do that, but you also need to be telling the right stories. you need to have a content strategy. You need to know who are you writing for, who you're trying to reach and grow to, and what do they need from you, and why are we telling the stories that we tell. So that's really different, and that involves analytics and data and talking to your readers and researching them and understanding what they need from you. And the last thing that changes that we're really excited about is your newsroom, those 200 people or 50 people or 30 people who sit there and make the good stuff all day, shift from being a cost center that the owner of the company is like, well, shit, I have to pay for this, but I don't want to spend more on it than I have to an engine that is driving the growth of the company, to the thing that is driving subscriptions and driving the value that people pay for. So they think, Ken talked about Connecticut this morning. Hearst bought Connecticut and added 25 reporters to those 7 papers because it said, we're not just here to cut costs and milk things, we're here to grow. And you know what? In our assessment, we need to get better at certain things to attract more subscribers, and we're investing in a newsroom that is now driving our profits instead of subtracting from them. And that's it.
Yep, outstanding. I'd like to continue the conversation with inventive things that seem to be working now across the landscape. And it's funny, you see a lot of these trends that are cyclical, right? Like we're hearing again about blogging and podcasts and newsletters. It's like 2008 all over again. But in keeping with previous conversations in preparation for this discussion, Kate, you had some wonderful thoughts on topics specific to trends that are related to the core business of media, but not necessarily are the core business. You sort of touched on things that I'd love for you to elaborate on things such as, paying consumers or audience members paying to be a part of trips with journalists that some organizations are experimenting with. We heard a little bit about live events, digital services, building on news organizations, ad departments, verticalization, which is a great word, right? Interactivity and branded content. So you're doing so much in this space. Would you care to sort of go a little bit deeper on this area?
Sure. To start with AP, and Jeff mentioned the need to change our organizations and learn how to be more innovative. AP a few years ago started to work with a consulting company called Frog Design to look at this, and they just posted a case study about working with us. And as Victor mentioned, we'll have links and things to all of this to follow up on later. But they really helped take a look for us at our whole approach to products, platforms, and customers. And products was, as I mentioned, trying to get away from that whole fire hose and one business model to being able to essentially get customers' content however they wanted it and to pay for it in a way that worked best for them. And then the platforms was to be able to deliver it that way, right? And that took a lot of work to build those platforms. And then customers was using vocabulary and words that I think certainly at the AP we weren't used to, and a lot of news organizations aren't, right? The customer journey, the customer life cycle. We created my job, which is Vice President of Engagement, and really looking strategically at how we wanted to engage with our customers at the AP and then help our members and customers engage with their customers. I was surprised when I started this that we didn't even have something that any normal company has, right? A welcome kit. When you start to do business with us, what do? Well, we used to send you an email with your login credentials, and it wasn't exactly like, hey, good luck, because we had lots of people around the country and the world who have very close relationships with our members and customers, but it depended a lot on that person and how good they were and how long they had been there, as opposed to a real consistent strategic look across our customer base. So we did all of that, and one of the things as we really are focused on supporting our journalistic mission was, where do we get the money for that? And some of it was these new business models, some of it is foundation funding, which I know we'll be talking about, and another one was looking at growing other parts of our business, things like our style book. The AP style book's been around forever, and we got a new product manager on it. And guess what? We have a mobile app and an online style book instead of that big, heavy style book. That really grew that business. Something that we used to call assignments. You could call the AP and ask for a photographer to come and cover something for you. Well, now that's a whole content marketing business, and that's grown enormously. Monetizing our photo archive and our video archive. advertising services. All of this in 3 years, from 2013 to 2016, we increased the revenue from all those lines of business 70%. So that really helps to fund the fundamental journalism. And that's been happening around the industry as well. And, one of the jokes today, obviously, is what's old is new, and, newsletters and podcasts. I was thinking about this notion of events and working with the people in your organization, your journalists, your photographers. Roll back the clock to 2009 when the Washington Post announced salons. Remember? Oh, the horror. They were going to have people pay, and you could meet thought leaders and journalists. The backlash was so severe they just canned the program, right? Well, now the New York Times has a new era of U.S. politics examining the first year of Trump presidency. You can meet with thought leaders and New York Times journalists. It's 4 days, $5,000. They have a trip to Cuba with their key journalists, 10 days, $10,000. And it's great, right? They have this whole Times Journeys program. And it's not so much that our standards have changed, but we've learned to become more nuanced, and we've figured out what are the fault lines and how do we get people together and what can we have people pay for in a way that doesn't create conflict of interest and doesn't create problems. The National Geographic has geographic expeditions, and their photographers will take you to Cuba, to India by rail for these programs where you, a community of interest, people interested in photography, get to go to a great place. They work with National Geographic photographers to improve their skills. Those trips are $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. So you're seeing things like that. The newsletters we've talked about. Other things, I think, are going back to things that we used to do that were difficult, but technology has made it much easier. The Albuquerque Journal real estate section, that's got to be one of the oldest areas of advertising in newspapers, right? Real estate. It was moribund. They weren't making money. They brought in a new guy. They worked with their stakeholders, so the realtors, the listing companies, the mortgage companies, and created a new section. It's called Home Style. They created a digital community, which not only serves folks looking for houses, but the community of for sale by owner, which is very interesting, right? Because that used to be kind of a tension point. Oh, wait, the realtors are, in for sale by owner kind of thing. They have a mobile app. So they're getting people any way they want to come in. It's now a $500,000 business, which for an organization the size of the Albuquerque Journal is just fantastic. You've got people doing apps. Milwaukee has the Brew City app, right? The Journal has one that is based on events. Their biggest is the Balloon Fiesta. They get sponsorship and advertising around this of as much as $50,000 for one event, and I love it. So it's an app that helps you work through the event. One of the most popular features on it is Find My Car. So people come to these huge events, very practical, but they know their community, so they know what's working. Building on what you know and the skills you've got outside of your journalist. The Dallas Morning News can mention them. They have a huge business of advising organizations in their community on social media management, reputation management, developing ad strategies, marketing strategies. So they're not just selling those ad spots and positions, but they're developing the whole campaigns around that, selling their expertise and knowledge. That's really the top of it. We could go on forever,
Yeah.
but I won't.
No, that sounds great. And certainly I think one of the themes that is standing out for me anyway this morning is, the emphasis on fostering deep relationships with our readers and with our audiences, and whether it's, plunking down $5,000, someone wishes to go hang out with their favorite journalist for the day, or more simpler sort of, low-hanging fruit, if you will, things like the Boston Globe launching their Facebook group for subscribers so that they can interact directly with journalists and other subscribers, members of the community, to talk about stories and issues. It's about deepening that relationship. So I love many of those examples. Seth, I'd love to sort of bring it back to something you said near your intro here at the intro, and that was about the power of alliances. And certainly this old world model that advertisers are hunting from town to town to pit publishers against each other for a low rate seems rather antiquated. You've said we're strong when we're in the market together. News is a national product to be sold to advertisers the way Facebook sells socially, nationally, and Google sells search. So can you talk briefly about the power of alliances and what that impact looks like across industry?
Sure. I mean, I think a lie has been propagated across the advertising industry for the last 15 to 20 years, which is that the only way to reach the totality of the American public is through search or social. And it simply is not the case. However, we haven't done much as an industry to stop the lie because news properties competed with each other for short-term wins. Or because we wanted to beat each other out on other sort of business models. And the truth is that together we are stronger. And that's what Nucleus is built upon. You can imagine, as someone who has spent his life at this intersection between advertising and journalism and wanting to spend my life finding ways to fund the journalism I care so deeply about, that it's been quite a process over the last 16 to 18 months of revelation. There are a couple of things that we have learned about how we are stronger together. For one, I love the line of what's old is new, but I also think what's new is really new. And I have some concern about only focusing on individual products or individual items. We need to think as an industry that all has the same mission, which is to drive civic engagement, to drive civic education. And we should compete to be more innovative, but not compete to beat each other out. In a way, I think there's hearty, good competition for anyone who is listening and wants to make sure that we are competing with each other. But let's focus this way. When you look at the audience of Nucleus, which is, we are the four owners I told you about, that's Gannett, McClatchy, Hearst, and Tronk. And we also represent the most important news property in every major American city, with the exception of the Boston Globe and the Washington Post, and come join soon. We reach more millennials than BuzzFeed and Snapchat combined. Let me say that again. The legacy news properties we represent digitally reach more millennials than BuzzFeed, Snapchat combined. And yet we are sitting here worrying about whether or not those folks will pay for news. The other is in video, which is by far the most compelling path to monetization today. There are publishers out there right now who are selling their video in small towns for $3 and $4 per 1,000 views. I realize that's in the weeds, but on a national basis, those rates go to $45 and $50 per 1,000, meaning when we ally, we are stronger. And so in doing that, when we brought Nucleus together, and we are now speaking not to small town businesses, although they're always going to be the backbone of local metro coverage, but we're now able to speak to the deeper pockets and the deeper science of large national advertisers. Well, we realized that as an industry, just for the properties we represent, not only do we reach about 152 million unique users, but we have more video inventory than some of the biggest broadcasters on earth. That's the news industry. We've got it. Right now, we represent 3 billion video views per year and 150 million video ad avails per month. That is larger than Viacom. And we're representing news sites. So I also feel the third thing we need to bring back as an industry is some swagger. Because we got beat on the business model. We didn't get beat on the quality of the product. Right? I'm very proud that Nucleus also represents the Associated Press. And that what we have built together and the fact that we are, as an industry, incubating all of this sort of innovation. And it's why days like this, and I want to thank RJI and Ken and everyone for bringing us all together, because we need to share the information more. There needs to be 10 times the amount of this. And so when we ally, we're seeing that the business is stronger. And while we're not able to say our numbers publicly, I will tell you that this year, our first year of full operation, Nucleus is delivering millions of dollars back to fund journalism that wasn't there before. I can't say how many. It's good. And it's going to be better. And the most important thing is that you have top tech talent working to represent all of us together, not each of us looking for talent to take from each other. You have top sales talent, I hope, I believe, I know them, out there, including me, out there representing the industry and bringing that swagger back and talking about the top level data tech that we're going to bring across the entire industry. So together we are strong. We should compete for the scoop. We should compete for the win of our individual companies, but together, because our mission is together, we win together.
I want to start with Mark, but open this up to all of you if you care to weigh in. And that is, I'm curious on what your thoughts are on who needs to be thinking about this stuff at a news operation, right? So we don't need to poll the room, but I'm guessing we've got a lot of executives and thought leaders from amazing outlets, and then we've got a fair number of students and faculty associated with the school. But, I come from a journalism perspective. Do we expect that in 2017, all of the great insights that Ken shared and now continuing the conversation, are these concepts, are these models, are these new formulas things that should be weighing on the minds of the working journalist, in addition to the folks in sales and business development? And Mark, you've spent time, many years at the Kansas City Star, working across the different groups, and now your efforts at the Missouri Press Association. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, and sort of the scope of who should be concerned, who should be pushing the envelope with new ideas and engaging across our groups to come up with the great new solutions.
Well, that's a great question. I remember back in the day at the Star where news was on a completely different floor from advertising, and I'll tell a quick story. Cabela's was coming to Kansas City, and we had them in our conference room in advertising to talk to them, and we brought the outdoor editor in to meet him and to talk to him and introduce him, just to make a quick introduction. And I was chastised by the editors at the Star for actually bringing that columnist in to talk to somebody like Cabela's. We were going to influence all of his writings. Today, that's not the case. Obviously, I know as recently as 2 years ago, I was with the Star. We're working very closely with the news side on different ideas and different metrics and different ways things can work. And as you go smaller, obviously people wear multiple hats. They were selling advertising one day and writing a story the other day in a lot of our smaller publications. And you have to open up the ideas as to what event can be marketable to our readers and to our subscribers. And I think that takes both the news side and the advertising side and the marketing side working together in that regard.
Can I add to
Sure,
this one?
Jeff.
So just to give you one example off the top, we did some work with Mashable earlier this year. And you go up to their office, they're in New York, they're in Manhattan, big, fancy, techie looking office. And you walk into one of these conference rooms, it's like glass on three sides, and you're in a bubble. And you sit down in that room, and you're sitting with the CTO, the chief editorial person, the chief revenue and sales and tech, and just everyone is in the room together, and they actually speak the same language. And they know what they're doing together. They know what direction they're all pushing in and what they're trying to achieve. And that's what it has to look like for this stuff to work well. We really have to be past the days where there's a newsroom over here that just does what they think are good stories, and there's some salespeople over here that just sells what they think are good ads, just to fill space. What really is required is a collaboration between business and editorial and technology, which is often like, we talk about the sides, there's actually a third side that we just ignored, to create new things and new revenue streams. And really where this all comes together is in product managers, which is a job that news organizations basically never had and technology companies have always had. And the product manager is the person who's in charge of making sure that you build a thing that delivers a great experience, a great revenue stream, and that the technology works and that it ships and it gets built. And that's the person who's in charge of bringing all those things together. And a lot of news organizations now have product teams and product people who fill that role. And it's incumbent on everyone else, to your question about the working journalist. You do have to understand where you fit in that, right? What is the story you're doing today and the beat you're covering this month? Eventually trickling up the line and contributing to the success of the product, reaching the right audience, driving the right kind of revenue. It's not that you're selling the ad, but you better know where you fit, and your managers better know, and you have to have that total awareness throughout the organization.
Kate, are you seeing similar levels of sort of cross-pollination at the AP with the different groups coming together, or is it still treated as more of a traditional siloed culture that unfortunately sort of has been building over the decades?
No, I think we're actually quite integrated, and I do think the work that we did recently with Frog helped us in that regard, just pull it apart and understand the different roles and then think about how to bring them together. We have product managers, and they work with newsroom teams. One of the things that I think, we used to think we were trying to protect people, but we didn't share information about the revenue. And until people started losing their jobs, I don't think they thought, I think a lot of journalists didn't think a lot about the financial health of the organizations they were in. And then they became paranoid about it, right? I mean, you don't want people to lose sight of what their part of the organization is. We created a director of partnerships in the newsroom to help us manage some of those things. So we're pretty integrated, but I think we need to understand and communicate across the silos. That helps a lot.
Very good. It's certainly not lost on any of us that the setting for the symposium at RJI and University of Missouri, and sort of along the lines of who needs to be thinking about these things and thinking about the future and where trends have got us to this point and where they're likely to get us in the next 5 to 10 years. Thinking about journalism education in J schools and preparing young people to enter into the landscape with fresh ideas, with needed perspective, with thoughts around new formulas and models and products and experiences for news consumers. RJI is doing amazing. The school here with entrepreneurial journalism programs has long been the case, but certainly there are gaps at most other places. Do you guys have some thoughts on what could be done at this early level to prepare these contributors into the professional landscape? Or is this really largely sort of things that are acquired on the job, right? You're sort of thrust in these situations, and you sort of get into these places, and you learn the inner workings and the players and what these challenges are, and it tends to be case by case or group by group. I'm wondering if you all have some thoughts on this, and just we can quickly go down the line. This might be 1 or 2 remaining questions, so we'll go through this. Seth?
Sure. 2 things. One, I would say some of the leaders I respect the most on the business side that are really driving innovation were former editors. I'm thinking of someone like a gentleman named Mark Zeman, who is a senior exec at McClatchy, who was actually based here in Kansas City for most of his life as a journalist and editor-in-chief at the Star, and then went on to run all of McClatchy after the Dyke-Ritter merger. And Mark also sits on my board, so I'm not kissing up to my boss right now, but it doesn't hurt. But I find that people who have seen both sides have a different perspective on the business. And then just something that gives me great hope overall, I also have, one of the reasons why I was so excited to come here is I love to see how the university environment is investing in the future of our business. I have an associate fellowship at the MBA program at Oxford. And they have created a program called the Future of Marketing Initiative at the Said School, which is the MBA program at Oxford. And when they created a program called, with a brilliant dean, associate dean named Andrew Stephen, who's one of the top-rated business professors in the world, when he created a program called the Future of Marketing, the first thing he wanted was someone from the news media side to be a part of those conversations. So I would say it's both building business leaders on the journalism side, but it's also how do we reach out to the people who want to be innovative, who want to be tech leaders like yourself on the business side, and telling them not only can they do financially well in the news industry, but they can make an immense societal impact in doing that and be mission-based. And I think there's the cross-pollination there is extremely important.
Yep.
I'll say a quick point. We're across the street, Missouri Press is, and we rely on the journalism school quite a bit. And in fact, we have an opening right now. We're interviewing for a person that would be our back-end advertising support, pulling tear sheets when ads run, but then they also are our digital arm in placing ads we have a network that we sell to other states of digital advertising, and so they help us in that regard. But the job duties also are our social media manager, that sometimes we sell websites to small companies and they need help getting their websites set up and who can write that content, and then we also need to post more on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. That's one job. And so we're looking for that unique individual, and those are the kind of people that, quite frankly, the university is producing right now, and it really helps us out.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 areas that universities could really help in, and it's both for students, undergraduates and graduate programs, but also the mid-career kind of programs, because as today's discussion shows, things are changing very quickly, and you can be up to date one year and then not. But I hear a lot of young journalists particularly talk about being their own brand and building their own brand. And as you've got the atomization of content, that is important. Helping us understand, how do you build your own personal brand? What's your relationship to the organization that you're part of? When we're talking about sponsored content and all of that, where are the ethical fault lines? I think that's an area that's complicated, and we can really benefit from education around that. The other area is business executives and business models. We tend to train journalists, but I don't know if we really train publishers and advertising executives and figuring that out. One of the things that struck me right after the election, when the whole issue around fake news came really into intense debate, I don't think a lot of people, even in the industry, really understood programmatic ad buying and the implication that had for supporting fake news. And the fact that so many people didn't understand it, I think, speaks to how you think that's the ad guy's job, right, or the publishers, but it really is not all of our jobs, and even the news community's job to understand. So I think there's a lot of ways that universities could help us in that regard.
So I would argue for two things primarily. One is the university's job, and one is your job, okay, the students. So on the university side, exposure and awareness, I think, is their responsibility. You should not graduate from here from any track not knowing essentially what Ken talked about this morning, not knowing how is the revenue picture generally changing, where are we getting money, how is it changing the imperatives and the audiences. You should know that no matter what you're doing in journalism, and you should have an awareness of the whole enterprise you're about to enter. You should know something about how Seth sells ads, right? Like, even if that's not your job, you should understand how ads get sold. You should know what a CPM is. If those things are confusing to you, if you don't know what a funnel is even these days, I think you probably got a problem. I met last week a great product manager at the Washington Post who said, she struggled early in her career because she went to a journalism school, and she thought, well, I kind of like writing, but I don't really like writing stories every day, and I kind of like designing, but I don't really like designing every day. And it took her a few years to figure out that product management was a thing she could do, and that she could get a job doing that, and she's been great. It's where she should be. And she didn't get that from school because she didn't even know that was a thing in school. So I think we need to expose people to enough of the whole enterprise so that you actually know that you're doing the right thing. But the second thing beyond the school, so I graduated here from the University of Missouri in 2004. I graduated a year or two before there was an iPhone, before there was a Facebook. There might have been a MySpace a little bit after that. But those things weren't a thing when I was in school and when I was taking classes. And over the years that followed that, I was at different points directing social media strategy and engagement teams for different news organizations. I was running the Metro staff of a newsroom and directing all the web content. And nobody taught me that stuff in school. At API now, we're leading an organization that is doing all this audience and digital stuff, and nobody taught me that in school. I'm basically building web apps that do analytics using code that nobody taught me in school. So you need to go forth from institutions like this with the mindset of lifelong learning and continuing to adapt as your industry adapts, whether it's learning on your own, going back to school, taking online self-directed things. People learn differently, but you need to see it as your responsibility because everything we've talked about today and we'll keep talking about will be different 2 years from now, will be different 4 years from now. You need to keep growing and changing as your industry does.